Alright, after you've got your scope and sequence built, you know the general order of your units and how you're going to clump all those standards together. We're going to actually develop those units in a little bit more detail using a unit map. Now, again, I want to say that there's value in recreating the wheel. Even if you take the scope and sequence documents provided by ISBE wholesale, please go through and look through it and make sure you agree with it. Because even though I'm one of only 3 members on the 8th grade team, the scope and sequence that we developed for the 8th grade is actually not the scope and sequence that I follow at my school, because the teachers at my school thought that they fit better together in a different way, that the standards fit better in a different way. So make sure that you take a look at it for yourself and see that you are doing the best that you can for your students in your school. Alright, so then as we look at our unit maps then, as we get these units put together, we're ready to start designing them, again we're going to be thinking about focus, coherence, and rigor. And so for the focus, we want to know what are the content standards that we're going to be teaching in this unit, what are the essential questions, what vocab, and what practice standards are we going to be using. Those are going to be the focal points of our unit of study. For the coherence, we're probably going to want to know what was the prior knowledge, what does this connect to that they learned in previous grade levels or even previously within this grade level. What is coming up after this grade level, and so where are all those connections going to be made, and then what sort of remediation and enrichment would we anticipate. Remediation you're never going to know until you get your students in your classroom and you take a look at where they're actually at, but we could probably have some good guesses as where remediation might be needed. Same thing with enrichment, we're never really sure until we see those kids that are in there and see what they need, but you might be able to design some things for enrichment as far as where could we dig deeper within this unit ahead of time. And then for the rigor, what exactly are our learning targets and at what level are they? Alright, and so then also included in our unit maps, we want to know what are going to be our assessments. How are we going to assess these particular standards to demonstrate mastery of these particular standards at the level of rigor that they are demanded by the Common Core standards. So as far as formative assessments, we're probably going to be looking for do they know the things that they need to know before we even start this unit, prior knowledge. You might use a pretest, which would be different than a prior knowledge test. A pretest would be to show growth. So a pretest will be, what do you know about this stuff right now? And then we can compare that to a post-test later on. That's going to show growth, where the prior knowledge is, do you have the skills in place that you need before we start this unit? You're going to have some in-progress checks, observation checklists, self-assessments maybe that the students can do. But the goal here is even list those formative assessments, even though they're not part of a student's grade, because they're just formative, they're in progress, they're for learning, they're not an assessment of learning. Still a good idea to have those things listed on your unit map so that all teachers are being consistent and unified in what we're presenting to students. And then for your summatives, are you going to have a post-test? Are you going to have common assessments across the grade levels? Are you going to have, make a 40-day plan, kind of with maybe the Danielson model in mind, and shows growth over those 40-day plan periods? What exactly are going to be your summatives? Are they going to be, projects and other miscellaneous things that could be on there? And for that, I would encourage you to take a look at my assessment talk on this website as well to dig into that in a little bit more detail. But for right now, you need to think about those things to put on your unit map. Instructional resources, what order will these lessons, after you break your unit down into lessons, what order will those lessons go in, and keeping in mind that the idea of a lesson now is not a single day, it's a multi-day experience in which we're kind of learning about one focal point or one focal standard maybe. And so what order would those lessons go in? Typically the units that we built with ISBE, most units have maybe between 2 to 4 lessons within a unit, and there are only 8 units there that we have, so lessons really are very multi-day experiences. And then what other resources do you have that are going to help in implementing these lessons? If you have PowerPoints or smart notebooks, or you have learning tasks, or effective instructional strategies, independent practice, by that that's code name for homework assignments, any of those things that you have electronic copies of that you can include in the unit map and have it hyperlinked there would be great. Now I know a lot of teachers do really well with notebooks. If you have some kind of binder or something that you're keeping, that's great as long as you're using it. It doesn't all have to be hyperlinked, but if you do have an electronic copy of it, why not go ahead and hyperlink it so that it is available. But if the binder works for you as well, that's fine as long as it's going to be useful. Again, this unit map, probably the map in and of itself is going to be more useful during the planning phase, and then depending on how well we flesh out this resource section of the unit map. If the resource section is not really all that fleshed out, there's not a lot of hyperlinks, then it's probably not going to be useful outside of the planning period and getting the big vision of what we're doing. If you're using binders or something like that, those will be more useful. But if you can hyperlink the resources in, then this could be your go-to document for almost everything. Alright, so let's look at a unit map. Think about the same questions that we put out there for the scope and sequence. What are the benefits of the layout? What impedes its use for you? And how would you change it if you so desired? So let's take a look at the unit map here. Okay, so here's a unit map that I developed using the ideas of focus, coherence, and rigor, and I wanted to keep that kind of in the forefront of our mind. So let me zoom in a bit here so we can see it better. So up at the top, kind of in the header, you've got, what unit is this, what grade or course is it, what subject, because you could probably use this idea of focus, coherence, and rigor in other subject areas. And then what's our kind of time frame here? Is this going to take 2 weeks, 4 weeks? What are you thinking? So the focus things that we need to think about. What's the big idea of this unit? What standards are we addressing here? Okay, and what are the supporting standards? You saw those on the scope and sequence document. What are my essential questions for this unit? What's the kind of the driving thought process behind this unit? What academic vocabulary do I need to really focus in on to make sure that the students know this? And that's also a coherence piece because it's going to help across grade levels. And then not only the content standards that we're addressing, but what mathematical practice standards are we going to have there, and what sort of opportunities do we have to experience those mathematical practices? Because you're not going to always be able to incorporate all of those mathematical practices into every single unit, wholeheartedly. We might be focusing on just a few that these really lend themselves to this particular math standard or practice standard or that math practice standard. So you can list those here so that we know what the focus is. Okay, then on page 2 of this document, which you can download here from the website, you can see is about coherence. So this is again, what connections do we have to previous learning? Okay, and that this is really previous learning, previous grade levels. So what did they learn prior to this? And this is where you're going to be able to build a lot of your prior knowledge, is from things that you list in this box. Over here, what connections do you have within the grade level to other grade level content? So grade level stuff that's within your standards, what connections can you make? How can you build coherence? What are some high probability remediation needs? And what might be some advanced learning opportunities, aka enrichment? What would be some of those opportunities that you could include right here? And then thinking even further ahead, what connections are going to come up to subsequent learning, so beyond you. So if you're at the 8th grade level like me, you're thinking what's coming up in high school that our students are going to need to know to make connections to that content. So this page is all about building your coherence as you design that unit. Okay, and then for rigor, we're thinking, what are the student learning targets? Okay, what do the students actually have to do? And this again breaks down into your 3 categories. So students will understand that what? Okay, what is it that's a conceptual understanding piece? What is it that's a procedural fluency piece? And what is it that's an application piece? Okay, so to fill that out, actually let me just continue on with the document for just a moment. And then you can list your assessments here like we talked about, formative and summative. And then here's your actual instruction piece. What is the suggested lesson order and the time frame for each of those lessons, and then what resources do you have for those lessons? So this really would be kind of your go-to section as far as on a daily teaching basis. What are you going to need? It's going to come up right in here. Alright, so let me move back up and talk about filling out this student learning target section with the CPA kind of in mind. So if we go to the the standards here, so like A to EE1 or something like that. Let me search for the standards, and we'll go take a look. Apparently my caps are on as well. So if we go to the new Common Core web page here, you can just click on Read the Standards, and of course they're over here. We got the math standards here, and let me just take a look at 8th grade, and we said 8EE1. Okay, so here's 8EE1. Know and apply the properties of integer exponents to generate equivalent numerical expressions. So if I'm thinking about this standard right here, properties of integer exponents generating equivalent numerical expressions, then the next step is, well, where does that fit on here on this map? Is that a conceptual understanding issue? Is that a procedural fluency issue, or is that an application? Well, it's obviously going to be a procedural fluency because they're going to have to generate equivalent expressions. Okay, so it's probably going to fit in this procedural fluency category pretty heavily. There's also going to be some understanding what the exponents mean, but that's been connected prior to this. They've had some exposure to exponents at this point, and we're firming up that process. Okay. If we look at another number, so here let's look at 8EE3. Use numbers expressed in the form of a single digit times an integer power of 10 to estimate very large or small quantities, to express how many times as much one is than the other. Well, if we're estimating, that's really kind of getting at an understanding issue. Like, how big is this number? How many times bigger is this thing than that thing? That can be a procedure, but again, we're looking for an estimate, so that's probably going to fit a little bit better in the conceptual understanding column. Now, you could put pieces of a single standard into different columns. So you might have part of 8EE3, like the estimating part, in the conceptual understanding. Even though estimating is a procedure, I really think what we're getting at is how big is this number, and that to me is a concept. And express how many times bigger is one than another. Yeah, that's a procedure, so you might split that across two different columns. Again, here 8EE2, know that the square root of 2 is irrational. Well, that's just a concept, an irrational number. It's irrational. So that's going to go in the conceptual understanding when solving these types of equations where those numbers are going to come up. That's going to be in the procedural fluency. So I'm going to split apart those the standards so that they fit within my unit map, and so I can set my student learning targets appropriately. Now, once we've got all these skills listed in the student learning targets, and I know what the students are going after in each case, what I'm expecting them to be able to do, okay, I've got the end in mind, then we can move forward into the assessment piece, and that's where we're going to be headed next. Actually, sorry, before we go on to assessments, I want to show you the ISBE curriculum models, the unit maps. Their unit maps are very close to the same, but they've kind of got everything in a narrative format here at the beginning. So here's a grade 6 unit 1. We've got some narrative where it's written out in paragraphs. The desired outcomes are the standards here. We've got understandings, which is again part of the kind of student learning targets. This is your conceptual understanding. Essential questions, mathematical practices, prior knowledge and advanced knowledge, and then what's a knowledge level versus a skill level. So here's procedure and vocab. So it's all the same stuff that's involved in these unit maps that are on the ISBE website, just kind of rearranged differently. All right, so now we're headed to assessment.